Africans see African Americans as Africans.
Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to another video, and today we have an important topic to discuss. The issue of whether African Americans are considered African has been a trending issue on social media, and today I decided to address it because I was once considered an African. Once upon a time, I was born in Liberia. I grew up in Liberia, and I spent 2 decades of my life living in Liberia. So I was considered an African until few years, later, and I moved to the US. Now that I'm considered, African American. Does that mean that I am not an African? Of course, I am an African, and that's why I decided to address the issue. So regardless of wherever you were born, right? Regardless of which part of the world you were born, you will always be considered an African once you look like me. Once you have this DNA characteristics of an African, right? You will always be considered an African. That's why the prefix African is always attached to the names like African American, African Chinese, African European, African German, African Russian, right? You will always be considered an African because they know you as African regardless of how you see yourself. So I don't want to see African American, talking about, I'm not an African, I was born in the US, I grew up in the US, I don't know anyone in Africa. Regardless of whether you know or you don't know anyone in Africa, you are considered African because even Joe Biden know you to be considered an African. Even Vladimir Putin know you to be considered an African as long as you have a complexion, of an African, right? Probably sometimes even my accent prove that I am an African. I don't even have to tell them that I am an African. Once I speak on the phone, you listen to my voice, you know definitely that I am an African, right? Once you see me once you see me physically, you know that I am an African because my complexion tells you that I am an African. So this whole topic of whether African American African is just a weapon of mass division, right? This is what the enemy do to cause division, because once you are separated, once there's a division, you become easy to to overcome, right? To be defeated.
You're going to have people that say, oh, Africans don't see African Americans as Africans, they see us as foreigners. I've been to the African continent. I've lived on the African continent. I studied at the University of Johannesburg for an exchange program. One of the questions I was constantly asked was, where are you from? I'd say the United States. They would ask me, where are you really from? They're implying an African country. Because as a Black American, when you are on the African continent, Africans don't know you're from the States until you start speaking. They assume you're just another African. So I would have to say a region in Africa because I'm not sure, because of the slave trade. But because we as African Americans, as well as Afro-Caribbeans and those in the diaspora, are Black, we blend in. This is why I don't like this whole African versus African Americans versus Afro-Caribbean. Y'all acting like if we dropped y'all in Nigeria, if we dropped y'all in Haiti, if we dropped y'all in the Bahamas, that they finna know you from the States. Yeah, when you start talking, they're gonna know, okay, he has an accent, where is he from? But until that point is asked, you just another African person walking around in the society. Just like you got this debate between African American culture, Afro-Caribbean culture, and African. Like we don't exchange from one another. Like you a Black American ain't African, but you eating yams and okra all the time. You an African who said we ain't got no connection with African Americans, but you listening to hip hop and Afrobeat. You say you ain't Afro-Caribbean, but some of your ancestors come from the Barbados and Haiti, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. Well, Jabari, we weren't born there. We aren't from there. They're gonna know we're different. Yeah, just like a Black person from Mississippi is different from a Black person in Ohio. A Black person from the Bronx is different from a Black person who's from LA. A Black person from Enugu is different from a Black person in Kano. A Black person from Johannesburg is different from a Black person from Cape Town. Quit the unnecessary divisions. Africans see African Americans as well as other members of the diaspora as Africans. That don't mean it's kumbaya. It means we are part of the African family, whether or not you live on the continent or abroad. I will go even further and say African American, along with Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Latino culture, all are a part of African culture. They are subsets unique to their own circumstances. And y'all can rep your culture. Because that's what makes African culture special.
Family, it's your girl TT from TT Talks. If I'm talking too fast, please forgive me. I want to convey a lot of information on a very, very, very nuanced topic, okay? I'm an African American. I have been able to trace my ancestry by hand and also through DNA. One line definitely comes from what is now Sierra Leone, the Mende people. Another line is from the Yoruba people of Nigeria. I consider myself to be a Pan-African, okay? That means that if you are a descendant of an African person throughout the diaspora, you feel a connection, a kinship, and feel as if you have a shared destiny. I want to talk a little bit about why I'm really not interested in participating in any of the diaspora wars. In my opinion, I think the whole shit is anti-Black, just off rip. Let me say that I have been to Africa several times. I've been to Nigeria, Ghana, I've been to Uganda, I've been to Rwanda, and plan to go to many, many more places in Africa. I'd probably say the vast majority of the times that I went, I didn't really stay in hotels. I was staying in family homes. So I have a more intimate experience. That's one of the reasons why I don't really get involved with all of the diaspora war stuff. We have been inundated with propaganda on both sides. Both sides. I've seen and heard not so savory things on both sides. I remember in high school, there was a young man who came to the U.S. from a country in West Africa. I can't remember. I think it was either Sierra Leone or Liberia. I can't remember. But I just remember having to stand up for him all the time because he was relentlessly bullied. I've also heard some very crazy and ignorant things on the continent. I was talking to a woman who she may have been from Mali, if I'm not mistaken. But she was like, "You're such a beautiful, intelligent, sweet, kind woman. Why aren't you married?" And I was just like, well, I haven't really met someone who I wanted to marry yet. I was like, I don't have anything bad to say, not much, but I just haven't. And she was just like, if you get married, don't marry an African American man, because all they do is go to jail and they don't take care of their children. Okay? I just sat and listened. Because remember, I'm in her home. And I said, well, listen, my daddy's never been to jail, and he took great care of my sister and I. And I know a whole lot more men who did not go to jail or prison and who are taking care of their children. I said, sure, there's a population that don't. But I also remember having a conversation with some young teenagers in Nigeria. And they were asking, why are Black people in America so angry at white people? Instead of me being reactive about it, we went on YouTube. We pulled up stuff about civil rights movement, Reconstruction era, Jim Crow, Black codes, redlining, all kinds of stuff like that. And after an hour of looking at all that stuff, they were like, whoa. In turn, they gave me a lot of nuanced information about things like the Biafra War. We talked about Olumo Rock in Abeokuta, which was a safe haven for people who were fleeing European slave traders. And so they fled up into the mountains and the rocks, and they were able to preserve their people. So it was a beautiful exchange of information. And in that, they had a better understanding that when they come to the United States and experience a lot of freedoms and a lot of luxuries and things like that, they understood that it was paid for on the back of Black people who were in America. And it's so hard to kind of get a good discussion going about it, because people throw out, well, they're the ones who sold us into slavery. And when people throw that out, that's how I know you don't really have the range for this conversation, because it's a little bit more nuanced than that. We've kind of sold each other out on multiple sides of the water. There were people from our African American Black community who were informants for the CIA and the FBI, correct, who also would tell about people who were running away or any type of insurrections that we were planning. We were snitching and selling each other out. So that's just not something that's specific to continental Africans. But my point is, just know all over the world there are Black people who want to unify with each other. And so my thing is, focus on that. And if you're not one of those people, good for you. Do your thing. Just don't try to impede anything that we have going on and that we are trying to establish. So I want to show you a video clip of an interview I did, an unexpected interview. I was just hanging out. I was on a rooftop in Ghana at a lounge, enjoying music, drinking drinks, hanging out. And I sat at a table with a bunch of men from Africa, and they were from all over. There was some from Mali, there was some from Ghana, some from Nigeria. I think that there was somebody there from Senegal, and there was just a lot of Congo. There was a lot of men there. And I sat at the table and we just struck up conversation. And I kind of paired off into a conversation with a young man from Mali. I was in Ghana, but he was from Mali, a young Fulani man. His name was Ali. And we literally talked for 3 hours. I have like 3 hours of audio from him. But I actually, while my battery was still working on my camera, still had a little bit of time to have a conversation with him about how young Africans feel about African Americans. And this is what Ali had to say. Well, I did. It was a 3-hour interview. There was a lot of stuff that I couldn't put into a 5-minute clip. But I said it a couple times below. That was a part of his experience. He lived a little bit of time in the United States to go to school. He was out on the West Coast, had some experiences that, showed him about gang life on the West Coast. And so that is where his orientation was coming from as a young guy who was mistaken often as a gang member, who had to be told that he couldn't wear certain colors. He didn't know anything about that coming here. And so that's a part of his lived experience. And so that's where he was coming from, because those are his peers. We're talking about a young Black guy here. So I really wasn't in a space to be super judgy about it. We did have a conversation about there's so much more than that. But he also was like, I get that now. But he's like, when I first got there, that's kind of what I saw. And then when you're going by things that you see in the media and you going outside and having guns held to your face by the police because they think you're a gang member and he don't even know what the hell that is, that kind of shapes an experience. And so that's kind of where he was coming from. But it wasn't even something that I had to correct because he was clear about that. This is like I said, a very small clip in a very long 3-hour interview. So hope that cleared that up.
So hey guys, if you made it at the end of this video, thank you so much for being part of my channel. So let me know in the comment section what you think about my point of view, and also from the opinion of other people. Do you agree with them? Do you think that African Americans are not African, or we all are one? Because this is something that we have to target, we have to overcome. We have to fight this disinformation and misinformation among African. So with that being said, I thank you so much for being a value, supporter of my channel, right? And I am working really hard to improve my communication skill and also to improve my presentation. You can encourage me by letting me know in the comment section and sharing my video. Just subscribe, let YouTube know that I'm providing valuable information. And I will see you in my next recording.